Hello and welcome to Alaska's Political Pipeline. I'm political reporter Will Courtney, and sitting down alongside me, gubernatorial candidate Adam Crum, former DOR commissioner. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Will.
Absolutely. Well, let's start from the beginning. We're asking all the candidates about their run for governor, and I want to ask you first, why did you decide to run for governor?
Unique background and experience coming from the private sector, stepping in to run the Department of Health and Social Services, leading it through a time of crisis through COVID, then being successful at reorganizing the department. Then when the governor moved me ahead, asked me to step over and to run the Department of Revenue, learned a ton in that role as well. And so then as I was kind of coming up on my end of my term of public service, evaluating like, okay, the skill sets that I have built, the private sector, running large organizations and helping manage the state's money, is a unique skill set that I think Alaskans we need to go forward, to actually to make some key changes going ahead. And that was one of the impending reasons about why we did this. And the top two reasons, though, their names are Ellie and Lucy, my two little girls, trying to build an Alaska that they actually can grow old in. They have a steady economy that they want to stay in. That's why I'm running.
And I remember we interviewed you just days before you announced your run, the last day of your time as DOR commissioner, Department of Revenue commissioner. Tell me a little bit about the moment you decided you wanted to run for governor.
Ooh, I remember the moments when I didn't want to for governor, particularly like during COVID. My wife and I had a lot of conversations about how it seems like the worst job in the world, and we were doing press conferences like 200 times, I think, during 2020 and 2021, trying to share the message, convey that communication amongst Alaskans. And I don't really know when the switch flipped. And it was just about thinking about what we can offer to Alaska, looking at who's possibly going to run, and can we actually change this? Because I have a personal stake in this. I could be a two-term governor, and I have such young kids. I still need an Alaska that has an economy strong enough for me to find a job. And that's a different imperative. That's a different, uh, you know, kind of notice that you have because it changes the way you lead. It changes how you put things together. You understand it's all about relationships. You can't go down there and just set it all on fire. We're not Cortez going to burn all the ships. You have to go down there and build relationships, work amongst the legislature as well as across state agencies, and really set something up durable that's going to last, that's not going to have whiplash between administrations.
And you mentioned in the beginning just a little bit about your experience that you worked in the private sector too. Can you kind of tell me a little bit about what you did in the private sector?
Yeah, business owner. My family company's Northern Industrial Training. Been in business for 23 years, training, putting people to work in the trades all across the state. I actually ran the corporate services side. So I did oil and gas consulting, contracting work. Did that for quite a while. And also from that, we spun off and had a commercial construction company that's still going strong, doing work across Alaska. So being an entrepreneur and having those lessons of what it takes to sign the front of a paycheck, right? The things you have to do to keep a business running, lines of credit, second mortgages, going without a paycheck so your staff get paid. Those are lessons that scars that don't heal. You always remember that, and it continues your ability to actually make sure you're protecting just the private sector as a whole. Because the time value of money, getting a decision done now is more important than waiting next week because a deal could be passed. So we have to make sure that we are always responsive like that and trying to get government to think like that, that being proactive, being responsive is a good thing.
Tell me a little bit about how your background applies to the role you're currently running for. You mentioned the private sector, being a business owner. Tell me how that applies, but also, working in these two very different bureaus as well and leading those departments during tumultuous times.
Yeah, having to run the businesses, you understand that life is about relationships. You understand you have to get involved. You have to understand topics. So I was on a lot of different professional boards representing the Support Industry Alliance, doing work across oil and gas and construction, understanding the projects and the prospects that are available to Alaska. And then stepping into and understanding how efficiency matters, running the largest state agency. The Department of Health and Social Services had 3,500 employees and $3.5 billion budget. Biggest department in the state by position count and by budget. So this is one of those things that you look at and try to take an objective viewpoint on how we're delivering our services. Are we doing it in the best way possible that actually serves Alaskans? Because these are really crazy dollar amounts. To put it in perspective, we were doing $52 million a week in check writes for the Medicaid program. That's how much money was outflowing. So you want to make sure you're being responsible stewards and doing these things the best way possible. That's where the private sector background really kind of comes into is like, okay, how can we actually make just even, 1 or 2% improvements in efficiencies and gains? That's how that happened.
And then tell me what you think the state needs right now in terms of executive leadership going into this next
Yeah.
administration.
Open communication, really clear, honest communication with Alaskans about where we stand, what we can work on, and how we can move Alaska forward together. That is something that I think there's been a disconnect between the executive branch and the legislature for a number of years about what those competing priorities are. And that's one of the greatest things that the governor has is the bully pulpit. There is no pro sports team in Alaska, meaning that politics is our professional sport. So on the front page of every local paper, every newspaper, you name it, it all has to do with what is going on in the governor's office, the legislature, or some key things in our municipalities. So using that to make sure you're talking to Alaskans, this is what I'm working on. These are the priorities. This is how we can get there together. I think is a key thing that can actually really help move the needle. Because you have to find ways. Good leadership brings people along with you. It doesn't just say, hey, catch up. It actually makes them a part of the process. It makes it so if they're early enough in the process, people trust it because they've worked on it, as opposed to just announcing things and then saying, "Hey, we're going to do this," and everyone's all playing catch up. That's not a good way of going about business. And so we have to rebuild trust and build relationships in order to get Alaska moving forward.
You said part of that was to make sure you're very clear about where the state currently sits right now. In your opinion, where does the state currently sit right now?
We are in a really unique spot in the fact that we're projecting in a year or two to actually have an increased throughput in our oil and gas pipeline, which is incredible when you're talking about a 50-year-old oil basin. But the investments that have occurred by Hillcorp, Santos, and Willow means we're going to have more oil. We've got these mining districts that are opening up. President Trump and his administration have actually brought in millions of dollars, 90 million to Terra Energy, millions towards Nova Minerals to the Department of War for antimony development. Graphite One has a lot of money. And it's developing these prospects. But where Alaska sits right now is, are we going to mess it up or not? Or are we going to take advantage of this opportunity? Are we going to make sure that we get enough people on board and advocates to support this, that we can build these roads to resources for the West Sioux Road, that we can actually build out the Ambler Road, that we can develop fully and help do what the state needs to do to help comply with expansion of the Nome port? These are the things that Alaska, where we sit, is like we have the world in front of us at this point in time, but we have got to come together and decide that we want to build stuff, or are we going to turtle up and just be protectionists and say, no, we've done enough, we've built enough, we're just going to sit back and wait. And I got to say, when I've been going around the state meeting people, that's not the mentality I'm finding. People want Alaska to move forward to take advantage of these opportunities that are in front of us.
And communication with the legislature you mentioned before is obviously very key to getting an agenda passed. This
Mhm.
current governor has set a record when it comes to vetoes from an administration in a single legislative session. So I'm curious, how do you plan to be able to work with the legislature to pass your agenda?
Yeah, I think communication in advance is a key part of this. There's a lot of bills that were being worked on, even by advocates or allies of the governor, that if you had given them a heads up in advance saying, "Hey, I won't support this," they wouldn't have put forth all the effort to getting things passed because it is a lot of work to pass something through the legislature. You look at the number of proposed bills versus the number of actually passed bills, and so that's a frustrating prospect when you actually are just spinning your wheels. And so I think talking in advance about very clear, these are the priorities that we're going to pursue, and then sitting down and actually working with the legislature, what are your priorities? How do we find a pathway together for Alaskan? I don't believe people go down to Juneau with just the idea of, I'm just going to be an obstructionist. I think people all have ideas on how we can move Alaska forward. It's the how, it's the execution is the thing that we all differ on. And that means you have to spend time together getting that ability to trust and understand how we can work there together and where can we actually come up with good ideas and mutual benefit.
And one more question before we go into policy issues. I've seen a lot of your campaign messaging. You label yourself as an outsider. I'm
Yeah.
curious a little bit about how you reached that decision of being an outsider, especially, as we were talking about, you have led departments in the government.
Yeah, it was outsider in the fact that I've never been elected, right? I was appointed, I was in these roles, and when you're running those, you're the executive, you're the top of that, so you are in charge of running that. And my approach has I've been a change agent at each stop. I try to actually sit down and look and say, why do we do it this way? And if there's not a good answer, we're going to look at reforming that. If there is a good answer, what is the business case for it? Let's examine that together and make sure we're doing the best things for Alaska. So the outsider mentality was more of the fact that I am the business guy who's going to take this approach that I didn't, after 7 years working down there, I didn't get sucked into it and change. For the people who know me a long time, I am the exact same. I have held my personality. I have stayed the same. I didn't let Juno change me, which is a big threat from people to say, how do you get down there and not let it morph you? It's like, this is how I've been able to do this and maintain it. So yes, I'm a part of it, I understand that. I have that mentality of I'm going to still go down there, and there's things that we can fix and improve for Alaskans.
All right, let's go over into policy now. We have some of the top issues facing Alaskans in this cycle, but first I want to ask you, Mr. Crum, what's your top policy issue going into this election?
Top policy is energy. Energy is the key to everything. It is baked into the price of groceries and the high cost of diesel. It is baked into the cost of road maintenance. You talk about Fairbanks, they had a 47% rate increase up there this summer. Just happened all at once. That is just such an incredible thing. It's a shock, not only to individual ratepayers, but to businesses. You have conversations with the mines up there, Fort Knox and Pogo. The rates that they pay as industrial tenants is more than you and I pay per kilowatt hour at our house. And they're going to rapidly increase, which means it's very difficult to actually make decisions for extending a mine life. And if we lose the two largest ratepayers in the rail belt, which are those two mines, it's actually going to put pressure, not just in Fairbanks, that's going to affect us all the way down here in South Central. And so we have got to find ways to address energy costs. So my very first priority that I would move would actually be a transmission line from Beluga to Healy that actually would open up capacity in our grid. It would help modernize this, give us redundancy, and allow for new power generation projects to move electrons north and south.
And we'll come back to energy. Let's go into some of the issues that I'm looking at right now. The first one being the economy and the cost of living. Obviously, we are in a somewhat uncertain fiscal future point for our economy right now with the decreasing price of oil. You've mentioned there is potentially more oil output, but the price of oil has been unstable to say
Yeah.
the least, especially in recent memory. But then again, the cost of living also partially because of the unstable price of oil and our dependence on the price of oil. So tell me a little bit what your policy solutions are to make sure Alaskans really aren't paying the high cost of living in the state, and how to address the uncertain fiscal future.
Yeah, we can't do anything from an affordability standpoint about the cost of goods or the cost of building a house. We don't have the scale. We're 740,000 people. We would need well over 1 million for that volume number to change for the cost of building a house. And so, from an affordability standpoint, that's why I really like pursuing energy because energy is what we can help control in Alaska, both access to the development of and the distribution of, because that can actually bring a lot more to our economy, both from an industrial tenants as well as an overall economic boon. The cheaper we can get energy costs, then the capital costs of building things don't hurt as much. And so that's one of the things that we're really trying to pursue. I like the Terra Energy project, right? That's an abated coal out by Squentna, has the capacity to bring 1,200 megawatts online. Peak usage in the rail belt 720. So this group can actually energize that entire mining district on the Westfield Road, as well as bring in excess power capacity to the grid. And we could do things like value-added processing on those minerals, which is fantastic long-term jobs, manufacturing, fabrication, that are going to be year round. Those are things that actually really help. And that's the more projects that we do, it's a positive feedback cycle. The better our economy gets, the more power projects we can build in Alaska. And that's where, because everything is so expensive, we have to do things at such a great scale that we have actually looked at a project, said, no, too expensive. We don't have the economic base, so we're going to avoid it. We're going to put it on the shelf. Now we can look at these and say, ooh, this is actually is curious because we can add this along with us. And I see as a part of that, while pursuing the energy, I think one of the things to help us from our fiscal situation in the near term is actually AI data centers. I think those actually have an incredible benefit to the state of Alaska because we are antithetical to the rest of the country. The rest of the country doesn't have water. Alaska has 40% of the US's surface freshwater. We are cold. We actually have what they need. And so if we actually work to put power generation on the North Slope to power up data centers up there in the North Slope borough south of Prudhoe, the ability for us to collect both property tax at the municipality level as well as the corporate income tax at the state side is an incredible potential revenue stream for the state of Alaska without putting a burden on Alaskans.
And I think you listed a lot of probably what I'm about to ask next, but I'll give you the opportunity to expand a little bit. The next question I was going to ask about energy and resource development. Again, I don't think I need to really explain much about it. Obviously, very crucial for this state. Tell me a little bit of, you mentioned several different outlets of that transmission line, of data centers. Are there any other, real policy ideas that you have, not only for energy and resource development, but also just potentially, part of another question I have, economic diversification.
Yeah, the economic diversification is really trying to find a way to get into manufacturing. Manufacturing is real, true year-round jobs that are very steady. It creates jobs not only for logistics, but the whole supply chain, and it makes sure it's there year-round. That is why energy helps do this. We have to drive down the cost, and the more manufacturing we can get in Alaska, the better we are off because we could take advantage of our geostrategic position in the world. We are 8 days closer to Japan than the Gulf of America. We have things here that our Asian allies want. If we can develop that and actually use some value-added processing or some manufacturing on that, that creates economic diversification, a long-term year-round jobs. It's not just seasonal that can really affect Alaskans.
Can you qualify manufacturing a little bit for me? Is there any particular
Oh,
industry that you're think coal?
Oh, it's a combination of stuff. Not only the coal, but I mean, we've got if we can actually on some of the minerals that we have. If you look at our agricultural industry, if we could figure out a way to actually get a spur from Fairbanks to Delta, we can open up the grain belt of Alaska. We can actually get some of the materials up there and the goods. And while the Alaska premium on things like oatmeal, which we have a higher protein content, may not actually pencil out for American consumers, it actually would for Asian consumers. And so there's quite a bit of different things that we could add onto with infrastructure projects and energy costs.
I heard you mention Spur. Obviously, that brings up another big question. I'm going to qualify this very quickly. When we're talking, it's July 23rd, and we're at an uncertain place for the gas line as of this conversation, and that could change by the time this ultimately gets published. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this gas line? What are your thoughts on the developer? And, if you are elected as governor, it will largely be on your administration to make sure this project is a success, assuming that some tax revenues are passed and if that's taken up in the next legislature. So again, lots of conditions on this question, but I do want to hear your thoughts on the gas line.
We have talked about doing a gas line since we found oil in Prudhoe Bay. So much so that when they built and they finalized the Yukon River Bridge in 1975, there is hangars for pipe on either side of the bridge. It is still sitting there waiting for the other side to be filled. And over time, the economic case has changed, right? We used to initially use the gas to help lift oil. It's called enhanced oil recovery. But now we can actually use this a little bit more. We can do this with seawater and things like that can actually change how we pull the oil out of the ground. It's time for us to monetize our gas. And this project is fully permitted. It has been defended in court twice. And so it is actually very robust at this 42-inch line. I think we have to continue finding a way to pursue this. This is something, yes, I pick up the mantle on because of the jobs, right? I think peak employment would be 6,700 employees. It's an incredible boon to our economy. The gas line and the access not only to Fairbanks, which greatly needs a new power supply, but down at South Central, the Nikiski area, there's a possibility then for the Agrium plant to get restarted and really drive down some of those costs are things that are absolutely worthwhile. Yes, I would continue to pick up the torch and to run with this, but we're going to need a lot of federal help in order to do this. There is a strategic defense imperative when it talks about actually giving a continual easy supply to our Asian allies because when Qatar was attacked by Iran, it really affected it. And they went from paying single prices up to spot prices, which is way more expensive. And so the secure route that is from us to Asia is something that is worthwhile. There's a risk premium added to that. So it would be pursued, and you'd have to find a way to make sure you get the municipalities on board with the idea, as well as get the legislature bought into this.
What are your thoughts on a long-term fiscal plan and how do you go about crafting that?
Yeah, it's a tough conversation. I think that we have never had a governor nor a legislature at either one time both actually mentioned that we have to have a fiscal plan. It's either been the governor, the legislature said no, or it's been the legislature. And so we've had these fiscal policy working groups and these ideas that have been thrown out, but they've never really made it out amongst the broad public. And so that allows then the opportunity for one-off commentators to actually take control of the conversation about what does it mean to do either this broad-based tax or this one back and forth. I want to actually make sure that we come up with a list of possible solutions and we share that honestly across the state to all Alaskans. And that Alaskans have input into that, and we've got a real dialogue, and that's how we can move Alaska forward because I do know that as revenue commissioner, I did not collect any tax from any individual Alaskan. We don't have a state sales, income, or property tax. You pay a property tax that goes to your local borough or municipality. And
Let's
so Alaskans don't contribute to the state government in the ways that they think. And so, is that something that we want them to do? What is the level of state government funding that they actually want, right? When it comes to education funding or road building, these are conversations we have to have an honest approach at so people can weigh in and then we can pull a decision and pull the trigger and move.
And then I have a few more questions for you. I think we have about a little less than 10 minutes left, and I want to get your thoughts on some last things. Two more policy questions. The first being public safety. Public safety is a massive issue. I'm thinking not only just in South Central here, but also across the state, lots of very different public safety concerns. So I'm curious what particular public safety concerns are particularly top of mind for you, and how do you plan to solve a lot of those issues?
Yeah, I think that I would like to continue to find ways to actually make sure we get more troopers and more VPSOs. And, we've got some excellent partners around the state who help the state with the VPSO program, and there has been some investment into that. I think there needs to be more to make sure that we continually have a presence around the state. And so it's a difficult thing on a prospect. How do you get there? Is it simply wages or does it have to do with professional housing? There's concerns that have to be addressed. I know that some pilot projects have occurred in the last year or two. I'd be curious to see what the results are on that, if we can actually use those as tools to actually implement in other areas around the state. But public safety is absolutely critical. We without law and order, everything else falls apart. And far too many areas of our state actually don't have a real police presence that we need to make sure they have the benefit of that.
Last policy question, ranked choice voting. It's on the ballot this November. I'm curious your thoughts on ranked choice voting.
I do not like it because it takes away the one person, one vote. You have conversations with cybersecurity folks. We have to rely upon an algorithm to actually determine the outcome of our election. That is a very big concern. You cannot hand tabulate this. So we're depending upon a computer to actually tell us that. So I want to get rid of ranked choice voting just for that purpose alone to make sure we go back. There's a reason why I think it was 14 jurisdictions, either cities or states in 2024, voted it down.
Last two questions for you, switching away from policy now. Just closing this conversation out. Mr. Crum, why should people vote for you?
It's a great question. That's kind of like trying to like get everybody engaged in this. It's to look at, three main things. I've been a change agent everywhere I've gone. I've been able to actually make improvements across the board. When I got into the Department of Health and Social Services, I evaluated it and saw that we were failing Alaskans at how we were delivering services, particularly to groups like OCS and Pioneer Home, because they would fall down in the priority order to public health and to Medicaid, because those items just always pop up either from a dollar standpoint or from a public health crisis standpoint. And so it wasn't a new idea, but I had the courage with the staff to stand up and the impetus to split the department in half. We truly reformed that and created a second department, and it has been a great benefit to things like juvenile justice, Pioneer Home, and OCS. And so there's that. Second of all is I've led and I've had success at every one of my stops, whether that be in the private sector, whether that be at health, whether that be at revenue, right? It's changing how the state's credit rating gets done, becoming the national vice chair of the State Financial Officers Foundation, and fighting against ESG policies, environmental social governance, that asset managers like BlackRock and Wells Fargo had, where it was anti-Alaska investment policies. And we would band together and we would say, you need to actually do these from a fiduciary perspective, maximize risk adjusted returns. And we were successful in getting them to actually revise those policy statements. And I'd say the third thing is because I'm personally invested. This is not a feather in the cap at the end of the career. This is taking the skill set that I have accumulated in the private sector and across government to actually benefit Alaskans, to not only tackle both big headline risk projects like the gas line, but to know how it works internally and the tweaks that can be made to make it easier for state employees to serve the private sector, tweaks that we have to do to make it easier for the private sector in general, just to remove barriers. No, and also as I said before, I have to build an Alaska that I have to live in. I'm going to stay here, be accountable for. This is not once you retire and leave, which a lot of our former governors tend to just leave state not too long after they're done. This is one of those I plan to be here for decades more after I'm done.
Adam Crum, my last question for you. What does it mean to be Alaskan?
Ooh, what does it mean to be Alaskan? Well, I have the benefit of being born here, which means I didn't know any better about fall being cold and cold winters. And so people who move up here willingly, I say that means they knew exactly what they were getting into. So more power to them. To be an Alaskan means you know and understand that the harshness of this place is worthwhile because of the opportunity that is available to us. And I think Alaska can be a place that is full of opportunity for those people that are willing to work. And for everybody that is up here in this state, that stays here, that moves here, I just got to say, like, I think we're all in it together. Alaskans, we all say, is a weird bunch, and living here makes you unfit to live anywhere else.
Adam Crum, best of luck on your campaign, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Will.